Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am live again. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am live once again on this old, dusty computer. You see, I started a live stream a couple hours ago. I ended it a few minutes ago, like half an hour ago. Some weird shit was happening outside. Had to go take a look. But anyway, back on until sunrise. I'll be playing some music through my speaker, playing some music on the piano. You'll see my cat here, as you saw in the thumbnail. I'll be smoking some cigarettes, talking about stuff. Anyway, I'll be here until the sun rises in the morning. So I'm back, baby. I'm back. So let's go ahead and get an LD Red 100 cigarette out. Let's go ahead and actually review the cigarettes. I reviewed it once before, then do a good review. So anyway, let's start off with the packaging. The packaging itself just says LD. See the packaging just says LD Red 100s packaging on the front. I think it's kind of cool. It has a all red, like pretty much any other red cigarette, like even Marlboros. Even they have some horses there holding a shield in the middle that says LD on it. As you can see there, there's just horses are holding like a shield with a crown on it or something. It says L Ducat, Liggett Ducat, which is the company that actually makes LD. That's what LD stands for, Liggett Ducat. It says Red 100s on there. American Blend, that's it. The back side, same red, same thing, same design, whatever, what the fuck, I don't care. American Blend. Bottom says LD top. The side, you got the Surgeon General warning. The other side, you got a bunch of other shit there. Says it's whatever. That's my phone going off there. But anyway, made in Turkey. So anyway, there we go. Get one out. It's like your standard 100 cigarette, 100 size cigarette. It's got a cork style filter. Let's see if there's any lines of perforation on there. I believe I am seeing one line of perforation. Let me get my light up there closer. Yep, there is one very visible line of perforation which might affect the airflow, which might affect the body, anything. Testrol. Little airy. Not too heavy, by the way. Very light draw, actually. Strong smell like a Marlboro. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this lit up. Now that we got it all lit up. Very easy to light, like any other cigarette. I don't know why I was doing that. That was weird. Easy to light like any other cigarette. It's just the body, airflow, and all that good shit first time. Nice body coming off of this. It's like a Marlboro. It tastes like a Marlboro to me. As you can see on the filter, it just says LD right there. I don't know why I was moving that away from the camera, which is weird. LD there. Very short filter, actually, for a 100. Let's test for roughness. Little roughness going down the throat, but I like that. That roughness when you inhale. It's what makes a strong cigarette. Let's purge it. Purge it, get all the bad shit out of there. Burns pretty fast. We'll say that. Only took like 2-3 puffs now, and it's quarter. I don't know how you describe that. The third of the way done. Very strong cigarette. I don't know why I said that in like a Russian way. Very strong smell coming off of this. My cat Lola below me. Yeah, it burns fast. I'm kind of weird. I prefer a faster burning cigarette like this anyway. I like when something burns fast. What's wrong? I didn't really test the airflow. Let's test the airflow. Pretty good airflow, pretty good body, big body, huge body actually coming off of this shit. So yeah, good cigarette. I love it. Very strong like a Marlboro. That's my phone going off a shit ton of notifications. Let's get some music going as I'm smoking. Actually, no, not right now. After this, I think I'll get my keyboard back out and play some more on the piano. Gotta be careful because my cat here don't whack her with the keyboard as I'm lifting it. This definitely gives me a nicotine buzz, actually. Need a sip of water. So overall, yeah, really good cigarette. I like it. Love it. I've reviewed these before, but I feel like I did a better review this time actually going in depth. Test the body again. Huge body, a little airy. Not bad, though. I had a hiccup there as I tried to inhale. That was a weird feeling. I tried to like hiccup and then cough and sneeze at the same time. That was odd. Maybe let's take another puff. Anyway, that was really weird. Now that cigarette's done, I'm going to get out my keyboard and play the piano. Careful not to whack the cat with it. Let's go. Play some of the keyboard. Piano. I'm slow. Right, here we go. Let it get warmed up. I'm not going to play. I don't feel like it. Something's wrong with me. I feel sick, like I'm going to pass out. Just get my cat up here. I feel sick. Anyway, let's get some other music playing. I've got a fart. That was strange, man. Oh, my internet's being weird. It's like freezing. Now I can unmute YouTube so I can play the sound. Let's not play that. I don't know what's wrong with me right now, man. Let me play some worship music to the Lord our God, because the Lord our God is mighty. Every praise. She's fine. Great song. I mean, that was my cat there, Lola. And she just walked off somewhere else. I don't know where. Right over there. Let's do some readings, shall we? So recently, I have been typing my own movie script. All right. I just feel like I wanted to write show my movie script off. Read what I have wrote so far to y'all. So let's start off. Brandon lived in a small decaying house on the outskirts of New York City. The walls, once white, were now stained with age and neglect. Cracks ran through the walls, some large enough to let the cold winds slip in. Through the harsh winters, his parents rarely spoke to him, except to berate or punish him. The atmosphere of the house was heavy with the scent of mildew and rotting food. The faint echo of broken dreams and unspoken anger are hanging in the air. Brandon's parents were cruel. By the way, my parents aren't like this in real life. This is just a fictional story I made, so don't get any ideas. His father was a hulking figure who'd come home drunk most nights and lash out with his fists, while his mother, a shadow of a woman, rarely lifted a finger to stop it. She would often sit silently, as if numb to the entire world, too consumed by her own bitterness to care for anyone around her. Let's take a sip of water. Every day, Brandon would wake up on the hard, cold floor of the small room that he was confined to. His parents had locked him here every night because they believed he needed more. They believed he needed more discipline. He had no bed, just a thin, tattered blanket that provided him with little warmth. His body was constantly aching from sleeping on the floor. His stomach growled out of hunger. Every meal was a struggle. Most days there was nothing but stale bread and water, sometimes even less. His parents would throw scraps at him like he was nothing more than an animal. He was rarely given enough to eat. Anyway, my cat's throwing up, but anyway. His parents would throw scraps at him like he was nothing more than an animal. He was rarely given enough to eat, and when he did, it was often snatched away as a punishment for something as trivial as breathing too loudly or asking for a second helping. His bones were thin, his skin pale and bruised from the constant abuse. His siblings weren't much help. They were older teenagers who had long ago learned to do what was required to avoid their parents' wrath. They would passively watch as Brandon was punished, rarely offering him even a glance of empathy. They didn't care about him. They didn't even care about each other. As long as they kept their heads down and did what was expected. Brandon was little more than a burden to him, a source of irritation and embarrassment that they wanted to avoid. They were concerned about not getting on their parents' bad side, and so they became numb to the reality of their brother's pain. The house was a silent battlefield, each person for themselves, in a cruel survival game. At school, Brandon's life wasn't any easier. He was a quiet boy, kept to himself, avoiding making contact with anyone else. The other kids hardly even noticed him. He didn't have clothes like them, didn't have the lunch they had, and his hair was always messy because he couldn't keep up with the regular baths. It wasn't long for he became target of bullies. Mike, a tall, stocky high schooler with a group of friends, followed him like loyal dogs. and he had chosen Brandon as his victim. Mike would shove him in the hallways, call him names, and laugh at him for looking like he hadn't showered in days. It was personal. Brandon, it wasn't even personal. Brandon was just an easy target. Mike had no idea what Brandon went through at home, but that didn't matter. To him, Brandon was just a nobody. Yet, despite the torment, Brandon did not fight back. He was used to being silent, used to holding his pain. He would take blows without crying, not because he didn't feel it, but because he had learned long ago that no one cared enough to listen. Now, Mike wasn't nearly as bad as Brandon's parents. His taunts were cruel, but at least he didn't hit him. At least he wasn't starving him or locking him up in a cage. Despite everything, Mike had a strange way of not pushing Brandon completely over the edge. Mike would occasionally throw in a comment that wasn't all bad. He would say, "You all right, kid?" He would ask mockingly, but there was a hint of something. Guilt, maybe? It was hard to tell, especially when the next moment he would shove Brandon into a locker and crack a joke at his expense. Brandon never said anything back. It wasn't worth it. He just wanted to survive the day without drawing more attention to himself. The worst part was loneliness. Brandon did not have any friends. No one who wanted to be seen with the kid who was always dirty, who always seemed like he was about to break down from the pressure of his life. The kids at school would whisper about him when they thought he wasn't listening. The teacher would ignore him when he didn't raise his hand. The school nurse would give him a quick look as if he was feeling all right, and then send him back to class when he answered with a weak, "I'm fine." No one cared. No one asked questions. He was a ghost in their world, his presence barely registering. At night, it was even worse. Brandon would curl up in the cage of the corner of his room. In the cage-like corner of his room, pulling the thin blanket over him, trying to knock out the sounds of his parents fighting in the next room. His father's angry voice would echo through the walls, the shouts of frustration and rage shaking the house. His mother's sobs and pleas were more quiet, but no less heartbreaking. He hated the helplessness he felt, knowing he couldn't stop it. Sometimes he would press his hands over his ears and close his eyes tightly, imagining a world far away, a world where he wasn't locked up, where he wasn't being hurt, where someone would love him. But the fantasy always shattered when he heard the father's footsteps coming closer to him and the lock on the door turning with a sharp click. Brandon's one escape. The only thing that kept him going was his imagination. He would dream of a life outside of his cage, a place where he wasn't invisible, a place where someone cared. Sometimes he would picture himself running free in the open woods, where the only sound was him wrestling through the trees. Sometimes he would imagine having a friend, someone who wouldn't hurt him, someone who would lay by his side, a small flicker of hope in the darkness. But it wasn't enough to keep him from giving up. In the mornings, when the sun began to creep up through the cracks in the windows, Brandon would rise, exhausted and determined. His father was usually still passed out from the night before. His mother had already gone to work. His siblings were in their old world, pretending not to notice the bruises on his face or the sadness in his eyes. It was a routine to wake up, go to school, get bullied, come home, endure whatever new form of torment his parents and siblings had in store for him. Despite all this, Brandon would never cry. Not in front of him, not in front of them, not in front of everyone. Crying would make him look weak, and weakness meant more pain. So he held it in. He learned to smile when he could, to laugh when it was necessary, and to stay silent when he was broken inside. He had no one to talk to, no one to tell him that things would get better. So he stayed quiet, and in the silence, he built a quiet, unshakable resolve that one day, somehow he would escape his life. He had to. Brandon lay in the dark as usual, just as he had so many thoughts, as he had so many nights before. His thin body tucked into the corner of his small room, his mind, exhausted from the constant fear of delay, struggled to find sleep. The house around him seemed quieter tonight than usual. The usual creaks and groans of the building oddly absent. He stared at the peeling ceiling, his thoughts drifting in and out of an uncomfortable haze. His father's yelling had long to cease. His mother's crying, barely a whisper now. Maybe they were asleep. Maybe they were plotting their next round of cruel punishment. But there was something in the air tonight. Something heavy and wrong. Then came the sound that would forever haunt him. The unmistakable crack of a door being broken down. It was the kind of sound that made Brendan's heart stop. And it was a sudden, sharp noise that didn't belong in this world. His pulse spiked up. His house seemed to groan under the weight of this new threat. He had grown used to the sound of his father's fists hitting the wall, his parents shouting matches echoing down the hall. But this was different. This was something far worse. Brandon's breath hitched in his chest. His small body trembled as he instinctively pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself smaller, as if he could disappear into the darkness of his room. The footsteps that followed were heavy, too heavy for his father, a man, a stranger. The darkness outside his door seemed to deepen as the figure moved closer. The air grew colder. Then a sound like any other. A loud, sickening thud, followed by an eerie silence that filled the house with thick smoke. His mother's voice, which was pleading, was now gone. His father's shouting was swallowed up in a horrible moment of silence. Brandon twisted in fear, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The shadows in the hall stretched out like fingers, beckoning him closer. He peeked through the crack of his door, his heart pounding louder than ever. And there he saw him. There he saw him, a tall, imposing figure, cloaked in darkness, standing at the end of the hallway, the faint glow from the streetlight barely illuminating his silhouette. His face was hidden in the shadow, but the gleam of his eyes cut through the dark like a predator sensing its prey. Brandon's mouth went dry. His legs felt like they had turned to stone. Every instinct told him to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The man's gaze shifted towards him for a moment. Time seemed to stretch into eternity. Brandon felt as though his very soul was being read by those cold eyes. The man stepped forward, his shoes making an eerie click through the wooden floors. His movement was deliberate, almost like he knew exactly where Brandon was hiding. He didn't say anything at first. He simply approached, slow and methodical, like a hunter closing in on his catch. "I'm gonna let you off easy." The man's voice is low, like the hiss of a snake ready to strike. Brandon felt a chill rush down his spine, and his entire body froze in terror. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, every beat echoing louder than the last. The man reached in his pocket, his coat pocket, pulling out a can. The metallic hiss as it was opened felt like it reverberated through Brandon's bones. The casual flick of his wrist, the man began pouring dark liquid onto the floor. Brandon's stomach churned, a sense of impending doom rising in his chest. Oil. It was oil. The man didn't rush, didn't panic. He moved as though he had all the time in the world. I farted. He tipped the can slowly, carefully, until the thick black liquid pooled in the hallway, its slick surface gleaming under the faint light. Sorry, I have trouble reading. I have like a reading disorder and stuff, so sorry anyway. When the man was satisfied, he reached into the pocket once more, pulling out a match. Brandon's breath hitched as the flame flickered to life in the man's hand. The next moment was a blur of heat and light. The match was tossed, the fire igniting with an explosive crack. The oil burst into flames immediately, the fire growing so fast that it swallowed the hallway in seconds. The sound of flames was deafening, roaring like a beast on leash, eating up everything in its past. In its path, Brandon's skin prickled from the sudden wave of heat. His instinct screamed for him to run, but his legs were frozen, his mind refusing to let him move. The man didn't look back as he turned and walked away, his silhouette disappearing into the smoke and chaos. Brandon's senses flooded with fear, panic, and a need to escape. He turned to the window, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the smoke filling the room. He had to get out. The walls seemed to close in, the fire eating away at everything in its path. His world was burning. Without thinking, Brandon scrambled out the window, throwing it open with his frantic hands, his heart racing, his body a mass raw of fear. The night air was cold, but it was better than the heat that was now choking the life out of his home. He looked down the alley below, too far to jump, but it was the only way out. Without another second of hesitation, Brandon climbed through the window, pushing himself into the night. His feet hit the ground with a sickening thud, but there was no time to worry about the pain. He ran, his legs pumping, his breath ragged. Behind him, the fire consumed everything, his house, his family, the warmth of the miserable life he known. All of it was vanishing in a storm of smoke and flame. The streets were eerily silent as Brandon sprinted through them, the night air biting at his skin. The only sound was the rush of his feet against the concrete, the occasional crack of burning wood from the house he had just escaped. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the fire had claimed everything. By the time the fire engines had arrived, the house was little more than a pile of rubble and ash. The firefighters moved quickly, but it was too late. The flames had claimed everything. The house, the memories, and most horribly of all, his family. Brandon's world had been reduced to nothing more than a pile of charred remains. The police arrived shortly after, their faces cold and indifferent. They questioned him, but their voices were hollow and the words clinical. Sorry, there's nothing we could do for you. They offered him no comfort, no help, no safety. They told him he was too young for a foster home, too abandoned to be adopted, and with that, he was left to the streets, alone, homeless, a child left behind by the world that had failed him. There were no kind words, no arms to hold him, just the cold, indifferent streets of New York City stretching out to him. Here comes another fart. He had no place to go, no. Let me get back to where I was. Oops. Something happened there. Anyway. Now 7 years old, Brandon had learned the unspoken rules of survival on the streets. His small body was thin from lack of food. His skin dirty from sleeping in alleyways and parks, and his clothes tattered from constant wear. Smoking cigarettes had become a way to numb the endless ache that gnawed at him, a feeble attempt to feel something other than pain. But no matter how many cigarettes he smoked or how far he ran, nothing could erase the feeling of loneliness that haunted him, especially after the fire that had taken his family, his home, and his childhood. One day, while wandering through the outskirts of the city, Brandon found himself standing before a rundown zoo. It was the kind of place that had once been full of life, full of families and children pressing their noses to the glass. But now it was just a decaying shell. The iron gates were rusted, the enclosures were falling apart, neglected by the city that had no longer cared about them. Most of the animals had long been sent away, but one remained, a large jaguar. Brandon had heard of it, though never seen it up close. They told stories of the large jaguar trapped in a tiny cave, beaten and starved by the zookeepers. Brandon hesitated for a moment. Standing outside the crumbling zoo gates, he could hear the faint sounds of the jaguar pacing in its enclosure. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and a cold wind blew through the broken fences. It was a place that seemed forgotten, a reflection of the way Brandon felt about his own life. Forgotten, but something drew him in. Maybe it was the jaguar's quiet suffering, or maybe it was a spark of empathy inside him that refused him to let away to walk that refused him that refused to let him walk away from another living being in pain. I couldn't speak there for a second. That was weird. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, the zoo began to empty. The zookeepers filed out of the gates, none of them sparing a second glance at the lone jaguar they had left behind. Brandon, who had gone in waiting in the shadows, knew this was his chance. The zoo would close for the night, and the jaguar would be left in his cage once again. But for how much longer could he bear the abuse? For how much longer could he endure the cruel indifference of the humans who were supposed to care for him? With a deep breath, Brandon approached the jaguar's enclosure. His, his small hands shook as he fiddled with the lock, the rusted metal creaking as he worked. The tension in the air was thick, but Brandon's heart beat with determination. He couldn't let this animal suffer any longer, not when he knew the pain of being trapped or being beaten or having no escape. Finally, the lock clicked open. There we go. The gate swung inward, and Brandon stepped on the enclosure, his feet light as he approached the jaguar. The jaguar was enormous, far larger than any animal Brandon had ever seen up close. His fur, though dirty and matted from years of neglect, still had a certain regal quality. His eyes were golden and filled with strange wisdom, as though he had seen the worst humanity had to offer and still found a way to endure. Brandon froze as the jaguar turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto the small boy standing before him. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if they were both sizing each other up, both realizing that despite their differences, they were kindred spirits in their suffering. And then, to Brandon's shock, the jaguar spoke. "Thank you for freeing me, little one." The jaguar's voice was deep and raspy, as though he had been talking far too long. It was a voice that sounded like it had lived through years of smoke and hardship, rough around the edges, but somehow full of gentleness. Brandon stood there, his mouth agape, eyes wide. He had never heard an animal speak before, let alone a jaguar. His mind raced, and for a moment he thought he might have imagined it, but no, the jaguar was speaking, and somehow Brandon understood him. "How can you talk?" Brandon stammered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The jaguar, whose name was Charlie, looked at him with a steady gaze, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I've been through a lot in my time," he said with a sigh, his voice gravelly. "More than you can imagine. But I can speak well because I'm different. I'm not like other animals. And you're different too." Brandon blinked in confusion. Different? How? Charlie stretched his long, sleek body, and his tail flicked lazily around behind him. "We both know what it feels like to be alone, suffer in silence," he said, his voice softening with quiet wisdom. "But you freed me, and for that I owe you. I'm not sure what fate has in store for you, but I'll protect you, little one, I promise." Brandon's heart clenched at the words. He had never had anyone protect him before. Not really. Sure, there had been times when people in the streets had helped him out of necessity, or maybe pity, but no one ever offered him the kind of loyalty Charlie was offering him now. It was a promise, a bond formed between them in a span of a few minutes, but one that would last a lifetime. Brandon looked into Charlie's golden eyes, and for this first moment in years, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. You're not like any other jaguar animal, he whispered. Something special about you. I don't know what it is, but you're different. Charlie's gaze softened and he nodded slowly. It's no problem, Kid. It was just the right thing to do. And with that, Charlie did something that made Brandon's jaw drop in disbelief. He casually walked over to an old, rusted truck parked outside of the zoo. The sight of an 800-pound jaguar climbing into the driver's seat seemed so absurd that Brandon could hardly believe it. But Charlie made it look easy, his massive paws shifting to the gears with surprising skill. Before Brandon could process what was happening, the truck roared to life, and Charlie was driving. Brandon sat in the passenger seat, his eyes wide, his mouth dry as he watched Charlie maneuver the truck down the street with a calm expertise. You can drive? Brandon asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Why not? Charlie replied, his voice full of quiet amusement. I've had a lot of time to practice. Charlie drove them far from the city, taking them into the woods where no one would find them. Eventually, they arrived at an old abandoned house nestled deep in the woods. The house was old and small, but it was warm, and there was at least electricity. Everything Brandon needed to feel safe. It was the first time in a long time while that he had felt a sense of home. As they entered the home, Brandon couldn't help but ask, Why are you doing all of this for me? Charlie paused for a moment, his eyes steady and full of conviction. Why not? It's the right thing to do. At that moment, Brandon realized Charlie wasn't just offering him protection, he was offering him something far greater, a chance at life without fear, a chance of a family. For the first time in years, Brandon did not feel alone. Apologies for the. I don't know why I said that. Brandon and Charlie had become legends in the small corner of New York City, troublemakers in the purest sense. Their pranks were becoming infamous, ranging from harmless mischief to more daring feats that pushed the limits of what they could get away with, from setting off firecrackers in the middle of the crowded parks to defacing public monuments with graffiti. They were a nightmare to the city's authorities. But what had once been a bothersome nuisance had become a routine. Cops didn't bother responding to their antics anymore. They had seen it all. Nobody took Brandon or Charlie seriously. They were just a couple of misfits, two outcasts who didn't seem to care about anything. And perhaps they didn't, not anymore. Sitting in their old, abandoned house, the thick scent of cigarette smoke lingered in the air, a faint haze curling towards the ceiling. The old house had become their haven, an untouched relic, where they could smoke, relax, and escape the chaos of the city. Their time here had become a routine, and both Brandon and Charlie were comfortable in their strange shared existence. Even in their wildest moments, even amidst the wreckage they left behind, there was a strange sense of peace in the stillness of the house. They were safe here, but for some reason, Charlie always had a sense that something was out of place. The feeling grew stronger one evening. Charlie, ever watched it, ever watchful, was the first to notice it. His amber eyes darted around the room, catching details that Brandon, distracted by a cigarette, didn't. A slight shift of the wall near the corner, just a whisper of change. Charlie's keen instincts were rarely wrong, and this time they proved true. With a low growl of curiosity, he padded over to the wall, his paws moving silently across the wooden floor. He pressed a section of the panel, and to his surprise, It gave away with a soft click. The wall parted, revealing a hidden doorway. A chill ran down Brandon's spine as he saw the doorway swing open. Brandon, you might want to come take a look at this. I'm getting a cigarette here. Brandon looked up from the cigarette, his brow furrowed in confusion, but he stood and moved with Charlie. His brow furrowed in confusion, but he stood and moved toward Charlie. The room beyond the door looked old but strangely pristine. It was a space that didn't fit with the decay of the rest of the house. Almost as though it had been sealed off and preserved. Brandon's heart skipped a beat as he took in the scene. What the hell is this? He muttered under his breath, his voice filled with curiosity and caution. The room was unlike anything he had encountered before in this house before. It was old, but not unused. The furniture, while aged, had been well maintained. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and there was an odd stillness in the air. It wasn't quite like the rest of the house, where the dust clung to every surface. This room had been left untouched but cared for. It seemed completely out of place in this crumbling ruin. Charlie padded forward, his tail swishing behind him, inspecting the room carefully. At the far end of the space stood a door, just as weathered and ancient as the rest of the house, but it seemed to be a beacon, but it seemed to beckon. Brandon approached it slowly, his breath shallow, unsure of what he might find beneath it. Without a word, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. A staircase, narrow and steep, descended into the darkness below. Guess we're going down, huh? Brandon said quietly, more to himself than Charlie. The Jaguar stepped aside to allow Brandon to lead the way. But there was an unmistakable weariness in his golden eyes. They had come this far, and neither of them had the instinct to back down now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. With a steadying breath, Brandon stepped forward, the chill of the staircase hitting him as his feet touched the first step. The air grew colder as they descended. Oops. And the house seemed to hold its breath as they moved deeper underground. The creaks and groans of the old wood above them were replaced by the sounds of their footsteps, echoing through the narrow, descending stairwell. Brandon's pulse quickened as they reached the bottom. The basement was small, but there was something unsettling about it. The walls were made of concrete, worn and cracked from years of neglect, but the room felt oddly compact. There were no windows, no light, except for the faint glow of Brandon's cigarette and LD. I'm smoking right now, but anyway. Charlie's sharp eyes scanned the space, his movements fluid and measured. His ears perked as he padded around the perimeter of the basement, sniffing the air. He was on very high alert, and for good reason. There is something beneath the floorboards here, something hidden. He moved towards the far corner of the basement, where an old weathered leather stood against the wall without hesitation. Charlie's powerful paw pulled it, and the concrete walls groaned as they slowly began to separate, revealing a large, narrow tunnel. It was long and dark, stretching deep into the earth. The air smelled musty and thick. Brandon exchanged a nervous look with Charlie. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown, the darkness swallowing the glow from Brandon's cigarette. But neither of them hesitated. Whatever was waiting down there, they had come this far, and they wouldn't stop now. With a deep breath, Brandon stepped further into the tunnel, the flicker of his cigarette, the only light in the thick, stifling air. Charlie followed, his padded steps silent against the stone. The tunnel was long. It was old, rusted, and marked with strange symbols that neither of them recognized. The hatch door seemed to that lingered in the air. What the hell? Brandon muttered, his voice filled with wonder and apprehension. I can't read the rest of this. My speech is getting bad. I'll let the text-to-speech read it. It's better because you cannot hear the speech very well. My internet's going out. I'm gonna have to end this live stream. My internet's going out, guys. I have to end this. Sorry.